Welcome to the Brothers Frontier podcast, where we bring you interviews with successful entrepreneurs who share their experiences and insights to help the next generation learn more to earn more. I'm your co-host, Drew Hantla, and today's episode is about the power of innovation to scale your business. We're diving into the journey and experiences of Dylan Hill, a digital transformation specialist who has built a career blending computer science and marketing to help businesses modernize and grow. Dylan's story is one of resilience, creativity, and the drive to empower companies to achieve their full potential. From bootstrapping his way into the industry to adding over $500,000 to clientele revenues through his services, Dylan has proven that determination and adaptability can lead to incredible outcomes. Let's get into it. Dylan, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, man, we're excited to hear about your stair-step journey through entrepreneurship and how you started in high school, went through college, and eventually through your latest venture of Cosmoforge, where you're really aimed at helping small businesses learn about that self-sustaining market strategy and so much forth. But before we get too much ahead of ourselves, man, just talk to us about that very first entrepreneurial journey and how it got you on this path you're on.
Sure, yeah. It's something I'm super proud of to this day. Basically, at the time, you're 16, 17-year-old, all that matters is college. That's all you ever really hear about. And you wake up and you think about, how can I get into a good college? And so I thought I would volunteer. And so I did it at some local charities. Because I was young, I was 17, it meant doing a lot of really boring stuff. It was not very satisfying. Basically, unless you're 18, you can't interact with the people you're meant to be helping. So it was a lot of paperwork. It was a lot of busy work. And I kind of left. I did 2 or 3 different things, and I realized it really wasn't for me. And I, for a second, thought maybe I'm not a great person, which I guess might still be the case. But ultimately, I came to the conclusion that I want to help people hands-on. And so I thought, well, hey, let's just make our own charity. Let's put something together. I drew upon an experience I had when I was younger, when I was 10 or 12, where my friend was stuck in the hospital fighting cancer. And we played a whole bunch of video games. And so I thought, well, if I want hands-on experience, let's bring video games to kids in the hospital. And it started off with just a ton of Google searches, how to start a charity, and then what is a 501c3, and then all the way down to making it happen. And then we made it happen. There's a lot of wild stories afterwards. For example, at one point we were actually banned from a children's hospital. I could share that if we want to jump into it. But sort of at the end of the day, a group of 16, 17, and then eventually we had our 18th birthday. We raised over $200,000, and we were traveling across the country helping kids in the hospital. And it kind of took the selfish, I just want to get into a good college, and turned that into, wow, we have the ability to do something incredible. Like, we can creatively express ourselves in a way that brings joy to someone who's going through one of the most challenging moments in their entire life. And that's incredible. And I'm so grateful for this. And I learned so much along the way too. It really was sort of a playground to see what we're capable of. I think that's a great thing, because when you're building a charity, you always want to help people. That's, of course, the goal. And it starts with effort. So even if the big idea you had didn't pay off, at the end of the day, you're just doing your best to help people. And it's a nice playground to just experiment and learn. So yeah, really kickstart the rest of what was to come.
No, and that's such an amazing story in itself. And there's definitely a ton we for sure could dive into. But just to continue that stair-step idea, how did that impact your growth as you then went into college? What was the major impact you took away from this experience? Because obviously you had to learn a lot, right? You mentioned plenty of topics there that we could dig into, but encompassing all that together, how did that change your next step?
I did end up getting into a college I was very proud of getting into. And I guess it kind of changed my mind in 2 different ways. One, I realized what I was capable of, I think, a lot faster than I otherwise would have. It's one thing to ace in tests, but it's another thing to do the things that we were doing. It built a lot of confidence. And then on the other end, I think it really, in a good way, showed that what was happening in the classroom and the stress that comes along with college wasn't all that important. I still tried my best, but getting a B is kind of nothing when on the weekend you're spending time with a kid who has 6 months to live. And it put such an important perspective on life to me. It can, it's so easy to get caught up in those details when you're that age. There's so much pressure around beginning your future. But at the same time that I learned I'm capable of extraordinary things, the people around me are capable of extraordinary things. Sometimes it's okay to not be extraordinary because the small moments are really way more important than some of those big ones.
I'm sure no different having that experience, taking your next step into college, no different than you're sitting in that class going, man, I learned so much in that short time span. And here I am in class learning these very basic concepts that I may never apply. And yet there's so much more out there for me. So to that point, man, talk to us about your journey in terms of where you're supporting your friend at this next point.
Yeah. So that original, when I was a kid, he was diagnosed when we were 10 or 12, around that age. He's a year older, so I always forget. But he entered remission after a bit, and obviously it inspired that charity. It inspired that whole incredible growth I went through. But then around this time, about 2 years into my college journey, he called me and he said, "Hey, it's back. This time the doctor is giving me terminal prognosis of 1 year to live. It's back stronger than it was before." And on the topic of perspective, I remember, I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but I remember setting down the phone. It was over. We hung up and I got right back into my economics homework. And then 5-10 minutes later, I'm like, what am I doing here? What? This really doesn't matter. Like the inkling of the thought was there with the experience with the charity. But now that sort of my friend, this person who inspired me so much, was on the line, it really just does not matter. I can't go back to doing this. And I had sort of the confidence angle that we talked about. So I thought, okay, well, let's do something, right? Let's not just settle with the econ homework. Let's not just pretend this is normal. Let's make this something big. And he inspired me once before. I think he can do it again. So I, after some deliberation, I made the decision to drop out of that college and say, I'm going to focus full time on helping him make his bucket list possible. If he is going to go out, we have 1 year to do some really cool stuff. So I use a lot of the stuff I learned from that first organization. We created a foundation. We created a website. We created videos telling people what we were about. We put social media, little logo out there, and we posted it. And within 24 hours, we had 500,000 views. And to this day, we have 200 million over, various platforms. Among many things, we wanted to break a world record. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what that looks like. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion we want to break a world record for the largest bone marrow donation drive. He had leukemia, so he was on the lookout for that perfect 0.006% genetic match that would allow him to overcome this terminal diagnosis. And so we thought we would try to raise awareness, and we did. We broke the record. 13,000 people signed up, and a few months later, we get an email, or rather, he gets a phone call and says, "Hey, you have found a match." And then later on, through the partnership with the agency that runs the bone marrow stuff, they said that person came from your campaign, your world record attempt, your bucket list videos, your sort of little adventure saved his life. He is literally going to go into remission. He is now successfully in remission because of what you two put together. And yeah, talk about perspective and confidence. that took it to another level. That really just showed like, wow, sometimes it's worth taking a step back and following the thing that feels right. And it really was, for some, the obvious is that he's alive, right? That overshadows everything by thousands of folds. But sort of looking at a little bit micro and thinking about where I'm at today, it also just inspired like, wow, I can do that. So many things we had to overcome. We had to work so hard to make that happen, but we did it, right? Like at that point we were, I think I was 19 or 20, and we did that. And yeah, I just try to remember that every day. Like if we made that happen, we can do so much more.
And that's the mind-blowing part to me, that before you're the age of 20, you've created two separate foundations which have achieved massive goals that most people would only dream of achieving, right? And yes, we don't want to overlook the fact that these things you guys have done and slowly built not only saved your friend's life, but again, you've created a community. You've created people to follow you and support your message and your dream and your idea. Again, with almost an entrepreneurial spirit. I hate to wrap in business into like almost a very life-changing moment. But again, for someone who wants to create maybe a similar situation for their friend or their family member, man, what are even the first steps to get this organic growth of a foundation that you guys got to, right? I mean, how can someone start on their journey to eventually find that 200 million viewership audience to then, again, just support whatever idea that's backing them?
Yeah. Thank you for saying all that, first of all. My answer is kind of philosophical, so maybe just ask to bear with me a little bit. But I would say, in this day and age, there's sort of a pressure to do really good, to be great at stuff. And if you are thinking about it from a charity perspective, especially for someone I would say just do it, and it's okay if you don't get 200 million views, right? I think some of the most amazing moments that I had through that adventure were the boring things. We were on Good Morning America. We had breakfast with Danny DeVito. We did a backflip in a helicopter, all these crazy things. But the best moment will still just be, my friend farting on the car ride over. And you don't allow the idea that, hey, maybe I can't get 200 million views to hold you back from taking the leap of faith. And I think that's where the success comes, is just a core belief that not necessarily that I can do anything, but that I can be 1% better than I was yesterday. And in pursuit of that, I can do anything eventually. I think that's way more important than like, how do I structure something to get all these views and go super big? It just is, if it feels right, make it happen. Like, just figure out what needs to happen, and enjoy the journey, as cheesy as that sounds. And don't stress too much about the outcome, because we won the lottery, right? Like, it's not something that I don't think we could do it again. All of our life's luck was concentrated into that 1-year adventure. And you might not be as lucky, but that's okay, because you're going to learn so much about yourself and the people around you.
And again, what a journey you've already explained so far. I think the best part to me is that you haven't stopped there, right? As we touched on slightly there in the beginning, that you've now taken this background, this experience, and you've continued to drive these ideas, these motives, your foundation, if you will, into creating your latest venture of CosmoForge, right? Where we talked about the self-sustaining models that you're helping small businesses digitally transform and help grow them. And again, we'll get into it, but again, your whole motive being a part of that journey and that foundation with them. Can you kind of slowly talk us into now the journey you're on with CosmoForge?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to it. The first one was, we, as a part of the huge support we got with those organizations, naturally a lot of donations came in, and it was obviously we weren't going to spend that on ourselves. So it all went to the mission. And as a result, because it was such monumental growth, we had to focus on it full time. Like, it wasn't a part-time thing, right? You can't coordinate these things part-time. So I couldn't hold a job. So I started doing marketing on the side to pay for my bills, to pay for my rent and whatnot. So that was kind of the groundwork of beginning the process. And then sort of as far as the motivation, I guess, as I came out of that foundation, as he entered remission, I looked back on this amazing journey. How was it possible? It was possible because of the internet. And I've always loved the internet, but never to the extent that it saved my best friend's life. So it really reinforced how important it was. And sort of the idea of that 1% growth every day. Yeah, I just reflected on that idea a lot. And, as proud as I am of sort of my journey that we've talked about today, I couldn't help but notice the same journey that my parents took before me, right? And sort of the evolution of the poverty that they grew up in. When I was a baby, they were living out of a van. And then my dad started his business around the same time I was born. And that grew into me being able to even go to that college, to even have the opportunity to drop out, for it to even be a story, right? Like, if I wasn't going to college, nobody would care that I was spending the year with my friend. And all that was made possible because of what was made possible by him and my parents and their entrepreneurship. So I guess it kind of came together as I needed to do it to pay rent. Entrepreneurship has made incredible things possible for me. And okay, I sort of have a knack for figuring out how to dream big. And all those three things came together into actually not Cosmoforge, but a lot of, at first, it was a lot of uncertainty. It was very confusing. I was sort of like, I didn't really know what I was going to do, actually. And so what I did was I actually returned to college during the pandemic. And that's when Cosmoforge came about, because I realized that it was just, once you experience the entrepreneurial high, you can't go back. And that is really when it became foundational. All those three things converged into, okay, well, let's just make sure we sort of, I don't want to lose the opportunity my parents set up for me, right? They worked so hard to get me into college so I can live an easy life and do a 9 to 5. Let's not drop that ball, right? Let's really give an honest shot at that. I did. It was absolutely not for me. And so, okay, let's build an agency. Let's build a Cosmoforge and make it happen.
To that idea, though, with the marketing you have behind you, would you say digital transformation is kind of a niche of the marketing side, or where do you feel like, from your experience, digital transformation sits in your world?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. So the academic background's in computer science, so I'm always kind of thinking about processes and things like that. And my sort of on-the-job experience is these foundations I'm talking about, where we go from selling cake pops door to door to appearing in the largest video game publication in the span of like 6 months, right? So things happen really fast. And the way I've learned how to do marketing is how to do it in a way that rides that momentum. I think what can happen with businesses, if they don't build their marketing out really well, or they don't build their processes out really well, they can't keep up. Like it's hard enough to get success, but what happens if you get success and you can't keep up? That's sort of the worst combination of the two. And that's where my background is. So that's where we try to help. Specifically, I guess, if we were talking about the most common overlap of our clients would be companies that have been sort of stagnant around $1 million a year in revenue, 500,000 to $1 million in revenue, and they just don't know how to break out. And more often than not, those companies are also the companies that were built in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they had their neighbor's son build an HTML website, published it out to the internet, and it got them this far. And that's incredible. And they provide great service, and they clearly know something because they've been around this long. But times are different and things are scaling differently. And how do we get you up to speed on that? Not only just updating the website, that's kind of a basic one, but how do we make sure that we're really ready to break through that barrier?
And again, for an entrepreneur, those are some great numbers to hear, especially when it comes to some legacy-based companies, right? But for someone similar to yourself, when you were starting off just trying to find something to pay the bills, pay the mortgage, pay the rent, talk to us about getting that first customer and finding that target audience. How did you go from zero to where you're at now?
Yeah. I'm terrible at interacting with strangers. Really, 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 really bad. And I say that to preface, I know how stupid this next part sounds, but you just got to go talk to the people you know. I think some of our first clients that 100% underpaid us, they were just local businesses that we walked into. A friend knew a guy, and this guy wanted to expand his side hobby into maybe a business. He's got $100 to make a website. Definitely, talk to those kind of people. I think that's the best way. But really be very careful about the balance between valuing your work appropriately and learning new things. For example, you could do a ton of free labor, but if you're doing free labor in the same thing you're already really good at, then you're not really going to grow based off that exposure, right? Like some people might say. But if it's you're learning a completely new domain that's adjacent to your primary skill set, then maybe it's worth taking a little bit of a pay cut, because suddenly now you can understand how, for example, a website might integrate with a CRM, customer relationship management. You can kind of connect the dots better in a way. And I found that is really something that I guess is a strength of mine, is understanding how A connects to B, how that relates to people, how that relates to technology, as opposed to just, putting all your eggs in one basket. If you understand how what you're really good at integrates with what someone else is really good at, you can provide so much more value for people when you're working with them.
And I think that's key too, definitely focusing on your strengths and kind of just running with those and then learning as you go to include to your package, if you will. What was your kind of initial offering, if you will? What were you going to these initial companies for? Was it mostly website design? And then to your point, slowly you began to add additional services?
Yeah. So back in the day, when we were doing it out of desperation, for lack of a better word, we just begged my dad. I mentioned he's an entrepreneur. We begged him to let us update his website. That was the start. And then slowly just try more and more things adjacent to that, paid ads, etc. And that's kind of how the relationship formed with a lot of those early clients. We had the most experience with websites because that was the first thing we did for my dad. And then we just, said, hey, well, we did this website. Can we do this? And that was kind of phase one. That got through the first 1 or 2 years. It was more of a bare minimum kind of thing. And then now that we're really thriving, it's mostly about kind of the foot in the door. The core value is automation. So if someone, for example, knows that they want to gather leads from an event, right? They're doing let's say they're a fence contractor and they're doing a home show at a local convention center and they want to collect leads. Traditionally, they would collect those leads with pen and paper, and then they would have someone manually call, email, text these people. That's a huge waste of time. Those people can be spending time with answering questions and providing really tailored services to interested customers. Let's have the automations take care of the sort of manual, tedious, predictable outreach. So that's something we help with, is just connecting their different marketing channels into sort of a central theme, purpose, objective.
Hey listeners, if you're finding value in today's episode, then Nathan and I want to let you all know we have a Facebook and LinkedIn community that contains like-minded entrepreneurs who are looking to learn more and earn more. We discuss and share relevant topics, strategies, and new ways to grow your knowledge and net worth. So, if this sounds like something you're interested in, you can look in the description of this episode to find our community links and social platforms to stay involved. Now, let's get back to the episode. Okay, so would you say your offering then, and kind of what makes you unique, is you provide the standard marketing package, if you will, of again, the website design and stuff like that. But then it sounds like you also offer some unique solutions to unique problems.
Yeah, I think so. I think integration is really our key thing.
And has AI impacted any of that, or is your integration mostly just, again, you're familiar with stuff from when you were in computer science and whatnot?
No, AI is a huge part of it. For example, a big thing with some of our clients is we can automate how leads from their website get into their CRM or notify their team, or how we follow up with those people, because it's very structured data, right? If they submit a form on a website, it's always going to have a first name, email, phone number, and a message. We can do the same thing if they get a lead from a lead form on Facebook, for example, right? It's very consistent, it's predictable. But that's not how the real world works, right? Companies get emails from random people emailing contact@google.com. I would like to work with you. Here's some information about me. So one thing we do in that situation is, well, let's make sure we're still efficiently handling those opportunities for our clients, because they account for about 30% of their inbound leads. Let's make sure we're efficiently handling that without having a huge lift on the human processes, right? Again, your salesperson, your owner, if you're a one-man shop, you want to focus on either providing the service, because that's probably what you love doing, or converting people who showed pretty good intent into becoming an actual client, because that's how you make money. So what we can do in that example would be parsing emails automatically, basically having an AI read the email for intent, pulling out main keywords. Say, for example, someone says their address in an email, the AI can pull that out and say, this is their address, this is what they want, this is when they need it, so that it's more of a digestible format. And then it automatically goes to different marketing automations depending on how that information lines up with the business. So if they were to email one of our clients that make custom vans for van life camping, if they were to email and say, hey, I'm looking to buy a van in the next 6 months, I looked at your the Drifter model, what can you do for me? That automation would be much different than someone who reached out and said, what kind of satellite internet do you recommend for my van? So yeah, definitely AI is a huge part. There's other implementations we do, but that's just one small example of how it can just help bring all the pieces together of all the channels that someone might have running already.
Very cool. And with these legacy style companies being your target audience, you kind of have to hold yourself back from not automating too much. Is it ever a hurdle with these companies to kind of slowly get them up to speed, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. The hardest part is if their entire processes are analog, sticky notes, for example, then there's so many different places you can start. If they're like pretty well integrated, but we just need to connect some dots, okay, fine, let's start with this. But when it's truly stuck in 2000, there's just so many different paths we could take that it's difficult to really nail down what's worth it. And then when you do, it's a matter of, oh, well, I set up that email 16 years ago. I don't know the password. I don't know how to get into my internet provider or my email host. Can you help me with that? And then, we spend a week trying to work on that. So yeah, it's definitely difficult, but it also means that it's the best opportunity to see a difference right off the bat, because the difference between sticky notes and automated email campaigns is more dramatic than something that's already on the computer.
Oh, that's a great point to even think about, right? You probably right up front already have some pretty happy customers if you've gotten them away from writing hundreds of sticky notes to just, hey, it's on my screen now. So
yeah,
that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
To that idea though, it sounds like you had to be a little bit more intimate with these companies in terms of helping them grow and take hold of these automations, if you will. So how does that affect your pricing structure, you feel like, from a typical marketing aspect?
It's really hard. That's something I continue to struggle with. I think in a perfect world, I would love to just be able to say, you could hire a full-time marketing member on your team for $80,000 a year. We're efficient, so we don't need that much. Let's do X amount, and we'll just fill in the blanks, right? We'll act as if we were on your team full-time, and we'll fill in the blanks. But that's not really how new relationships work, right? It needs to be a little bit more structured and easier to digest. So often what we do is we use some of the channels that we know we're going to be spending a lot of time with. For example, Google search ads. We'll do a typical service like you would with any other agency, with sort of an understanding that we're going to make sure your Google search ads are really good, but we're also going to make sure that they are actually tracking correctly. We're going to make sure that they're going to the right place, and we're going to fill in those blanks, because we really see ourselves as an internal employee that just happens to have many jobs, I guess, right? Right? Like we are passionate about your business. We are entrepreneurs. We know what it means to get excited when a new lead comes in, or we know what it means to get stressed when you spend $1,000 and no results come. And we want to be there to sort of take care of you. But at the same time, that's just so difficult to communicate in like the traditional proposal process. It's easy to say, trust me, bro, but it's difficult to communicate that in a way it's easy to build that trust. But once we develop that relationship, then it's all good. Long way of saying it's tough. It's really tough. And we're thinking about that a lot.
Oh, I wish it was as easy as trust me, bro. We got you. We'll make it happen.
Yeah.
If only. So to that point though, is it structured more so like a contracted part-time employee in that sense, like a fractional employee that then you just kind of mark up hours on, or so, like, again, we don't have to get like perfect picture, but just kind of help lay out just generally how it's kind of handled.
Yeah. So we definitely do try to position ourselves as fractional chief marketing officer with the ability to execute, a key distinction that's important to us. We don't bill hourly typically. Sometimes if they know that they'll be launching a lot of different channels, and maybe they already have an agency running those channels, but they want to make sure that it's integrated with all the other stuff they're doing, then we might bill hourly there just based on the automations that we build out. But no, typically it's on a per project basis, month to month retainer. And then we just distinguish between one time and reoccurring. So, one time would be like building a new website. There's not typically much upkeep after that. And then reoccurring would just be probably for the generic marketing services like search ads or SEO or something like that. But with the intent 100% on our side to make sure that we're not just doing the Google ads. We're making sure that the Google ads make sense in the context of whatever other channels, campaigns that we're running, or maybe it's another agency. We want to make sure we're locked in and everyone's on the same page. And that's where the fractional CMO part comes in. We try to take care of that, make sure it all makes sense. Because a lot of people at the revenue range that we sort of work with, they have a freelancer that their brother recommended doing analytics. They have someone from Fiverr doing SEO, right? And a lot of those people are very talented, but it's very siloed. And it's difficult for them to understand how their work contributes to the overall mission. And as a result, you miss out on a lot of results and a lot of sort of low-hanging fruit when you connect all the pieces together more efficiently.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. First off, why this range, if you will? Why the $500,000 to $500,000 group? Is it because you've determined that that's the group that would be best prepared for digital transformation? Talk to us a little bit about that target audience, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have a lot to learn. I think that might change in the next 3 years or so. But from the clients that we work with, so we specifically work with companies that have high lead values. So basically, someone submitting a form on their website is worth at least $500. And from the clients we have, sort of that relationship between high lead value and their revenue, somewhere between the revenue range that we're talking about is when they know that they need someone's help to sort of evolve, right? Like referrals can only get you so far. But at the same time, they either don't have the operational capacity, they don't have the budget, or they don't have the confidence to hire someone. So, for example, if you're making $1 million a year, you probably have the budget to hire someone, depending on your margins. You also don't have 100 employees. So hiring someone's going to be a very tedious process, and you don't really want to manage them. And so we would be a good fit, right? Because we're self-managing. You don't have to worry about onboarding. You don't have to worry about retaining a lawyer to worry about tax law, stuff like that. So we kind of fill in that blank, I guess. It just happens to be the sweet spot where they know they need someone who's really good at this, who will take care of the details, but also consider the overarching business goals, but just aren't quite in the place to hire that full-time marketing manager, that full-time director of marketing, or whatever title they might come up with. And the caveat here is anyone listening, if they want support, if they just had their idea 5 minutes ago, they can reach out. I'll provide guidance there for sure. But yeah, for our main services, that's kind of where we go.
And that's key for sure. To that point, maybe what I'm kind of hearing is that these companies are aware that the problems exist. And I know problems do sound a little bit harsh, but they're aware that they need some steps to move forward. So is a lot of your new customer acquisition through searches that you're kind of tracking and then following up with? Are they reaching out to you? How is that usually done for new guest leads?
Right now, it's just been a lot of referrals, and it's been a lot of Google ads. But we need to improve that. That's something we need to improve internally. And I'm working hard on is to, for example, there's a lot of sort of adjacent questions that business owners ask when their fundamental question is, how do I break through this revenue that I've been stuck at for 5 years? They might search, how do I hire a marketing person? Or how to pick a good agency? Questions like that. I want to do better at providing those answers there, so that it's a little bit easier for them to see us as a solution to that bigger problem. If we can help them with the small questions, then we can help them with the big problems. So yeah, we're trying to move away from sort of the high intent, low volume growth through referrals and search ads. But, naturally, as we tell our clients, it's a balance between immediate results and the impact that has on operations and the cost that requires to the patience it requires to wait for all those sort of slower campaigns, those slower channels to see results. So we're going through the balancing act ourselves.
And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. It's just continued growth, continued development. I love it.
Yeah.
To build off of a point you mentioned there, right, where you're coming in with someone who's like, man, I've plateaued at this $1 million. And not that I'm trying to be the richest guy in the world, but I got more employees. I got to keep growing. I got to keep ahead of inflation. What are the metrics you're using to help them? Is it money saved, money earned, additional leads? What are those typical metrics that you're using to kind of present as your offering, if you will?
Yeah. I guess to really fundamentally simplify our process before answering that question, most of the time, the problem is the company doesn't understand where they are at. So that's usually our first step. Like fundamentally, what is your data? And then we say, okay, now that we know your data, what's a realistic point from there? For example, if you're getting 100 leads, it's very unrealistic to say you're going to get 2,000 in a year. Like that's probably not going to happen unless you're spending a lot of money. And then now that we know our point A, where we are, and our point B, where we want to go realistically, how do we get there? What channels make sense for the customers that we're serving? What channels make sense for our internal capabilities? What channels make sense for our budget, etc.? Like what's a realistic way to transition from where we are to where we want to go? So to answer your question, that typically happens in the where are we now. It's difficult to say one key metric, but I will say that it's very consistent that even companies that are growing their revenue and not necessarily stuck, but certainly the ones that are stuck, they have no idea truly the nuances of where they are, right? So they might know we're getting a lot of phone calls this month and it feels great. And if you were to ask them, what does that compare to last year? Not only do they not know, but they have no idea where to look, right? I mean, if you're thinking about the sticky note customer, how would you even begin to quantify the number of sticky notes from last year compared to the sticky notes this year, which is an extreme example, but nonetheless, hopefully serves the example of before you worry about a core metric, make sure you have metrics and make sure you have something, because it's usually better to build off of what you do have rather than trying to sort of work around a key arbitrary metric. So if I were to say, get your leads up, people might not have any idea of their average customer value, their lifetime value, their conversion rate, but they might say, okay, well, I got to track leads. But that's not really the right way to do it. You really want to understand as much as you can about the business holistically, and then figure out sort of which one's been stagnant, which one's been growing, why has this not been moving? And I guess understand, again, the relationship between all these variables rather than hyper-focusing on just one. But leads definitely do come up pretty frequently, right? Because it's high lead value clients. So the more leads you get, typically, if you can keep the value of those leads consistent, then definitely grow your leads. But it's typically more nuanced than that. There's other opportunities maybe than just growing the number of leads. There's a lot of other ways to kind of cut the growth pie.
Understood, man. And then now flip side, right? How do you plan to scale and grow your operation over time? What are some of the things that you're dealing with now, and where do you see yourself kind of in the future?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the treating our clients like our own business is something that is fundamentally important to me, but it's also very difficult to scale. There's a reason that other agencies focus on core services, right? And they don't just say, trust me, bro, I'll fill in the blanks, because that's not scalable and that's not how they grow. So that's a huge challenge. I don't think I mentioned it today, but part of that sort of spiritual adventure going back to college to confirm, is this really what I want to do? I did go and get my master's in business. And I think that's been really helpful, again, for connecting the dots. But I took a lot of operations classes, and that really helped me to think about a realm that I might not otherwise interface with. Because my personal experience, it was extremely on the marketing side. The operations of a charity is sort of just show up at the place and give a PlayStation to a kid. It's very simple. It's very rarely the bottleneck. So yeah, I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking a lot about how we can automate sort of how we serve our clients in a way that still treats them as if it's our own company. And it's challenging, but it's also possible. I think we've had good success. Primarily, it just comes from really the basics of good internal communication, good internal documentation, good task management, project management. But all that, again, it comes back to the motivation. So yeah, we just got to make sure that if we continue to treat our clients like it's our company, we're going to make it happen, because that's what you do when it's your company, So I'm trying to figure out like how, as we get more people on the team, we can incentivize them to have that same perspective, because I don't want them to just mindlessly work on client accounts to get some number up that might not even be an accurate number. I want them to really think about, okay, great, we accomplished that. What's next? How can we keep accomplishing? I want them to become experts in random stuff too. That's important to me. Like I've recently become experts in frozen freight, which is, couldn't tell you a month ago was an interest of mine, but now, technically I'm running I role playing running a company that is in that industry. So I think a lot about it, and yeah, that's kind of the challenge.
Well, and something I may have overlooked earlier is that whether this was a starting off solo venture or with your team, right? You've talked a lot about how internally you're very motivation driven with a passion and a goal and dreams and stuff like that. So then to that point, it sounds like you're on a great path, but then, okay, has this been a solo operation the whole time, or do you have a team? And then what's that experience been like running a team to keep that image and that idea running with the team?
Yeah. So in Cosmoforge, it has been myself for about a year. And then I actually have another team member who's now working, unfortunately, as a contractor full-time. I hope to be able to make that transition soon. So small team. But no, we actually are looking very soon to hire someone now. And I think it's very challenging, but it's very rewarding. So one of the things with this first team member, Yaman, he has a name, so I'll call him Yaman. And what I want to continue to do with other people is the first 6 months, as you're sort of learning our unique internal processes, right? Again, because we're not just cookie cutter the same services to a bunch of clients in the same industry, even because we're treating each client so personally, the internal processes are a little bit different. So the first 6 months, as you onboard to those processes, let's apply them to a charity of your choice. Reach out to a charity. We'll provide them free of charge. We'll help them grow, right? And you will be in charge of them. Pretend that this is your charity, and every single time that you log into Google Ads or every time that you think about strategy, think about what it means for you and what it means for sort of the people that they're serving. How much can they help because of the work that you put in? So it gets them up to speed on how we do things, right? Like our communication style, our task management, that sort of thing. The idea of thinking of what comes next, probably from my bias, but the idea is to give them a sandbox to be an entrepreneur if they don't already have that experience. At the end of the day, if we're trying to help people, we very rarely make mistakes, of course. But even if we do, it's okay. We're going to learn a lot from this, and we're going to make it so much better for the next organization that we help because we learned from our mistakes. So yeah, that's a big part of it too, is sort of the onboarding process. And I guess we have a sample size of 1 so far on that process, but it feels good. It feels strong, rewarding, and definitely intend to keep that going as a big part of it.
Well, man, for the sample size it is, I think you did a great job of
Thank you.
kind of what I was getting at in terms of, how would you go about keeping the dream alive? And you did it and did more than that. You allowed them, to your point, have that sandbox to kind of, hey, take this where you want, right? I brought this up from my experience, from my background, but I want you to be able to have that same experience. I think you've done a great job of, again, keeping that foundation, if you will, alive. That's great, man.
Right.
Building off of those ideas, we've talked about a lot today. We've not talked about a lot today. Is there one major encompassing idea, word of wisdom, or just something to kind of send the audience home with in terms of what's been a major image for you over these past couple of years?
I would say I didn't realize this until recently in hindsight, but the internal motto that we're working with is be excellent enough. And the distinction there is, first, be excellent, right? We want to be better than we were yesterday, and we want to be better than the competition, than our peers, than the alternative. But at the same time, so much of excellence comes from experimentation and iteration. So you don't want to obsess on perfection. And that's where the enough comes in. And I think that is been very important as I reflect back the through line, right? When I submitted that charity documentation, when I was 16, 17, I probably did something wrong. In fact, I did. I found out at the beginning of this year that we had not been in the California, we were registered with the Secretary of State, but not the Department of Justice or something. And that was a huge hassle. And that's a pretty big mistake. It's now rectified. We're all good. But if we had obsessed over, let's make this perfect, let's be 100% on board, we never would have built that organization. We never would have served those people. I never would have learned how to grow an organization. And at the risk of probably being way too dramatic than I need to be, my friend might not still be here if we hadn't just gone for it as best as we possibly could based off of our current skill set and an honest reflection of ourselves. Let's be excellent. But if you slow down too much in pursuit of perfection, you're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on the momentum. And that's kind of the way we go. And I think that's a through line that I've been reflecting on quite a bit.
Continuing with that idea of bringing it all back around to kind of where you started and how it's, again, continued on this stair-step journey. Bring us back to kind of some of those early days, man. Are there any good resources you had back then that you would recommend for others, whether it be books, podcasts, creators, you name it? Was there some very impactful stuff that someone can educate themselves with that helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, what works for me might not work for everyone else. I am not very good at knowledge first, application later. I don't like to just watch a video telling me how to do something. I like to jump head first into an objective, build a website, register a charity, and then kind of work backwards from there, break it down into steps and say, what do I need to know to achieve this goal? I think it's a lot more satisfying. It's a lot more applicable. And I guess it just doesn't feel quite like you're learning for the sake of learning. It feels like you're learning for the sake of doing something. And that helps motivate me a lot more than just like reading blogs or anything like that. So yeah, I would recommend, if you have a favorite charity, hopefully it's small so that you can reach out to them and say, hey, I really want to get better at, doesn't even have to be marketing. It could be programming. It could be operations, whatever. Is there any place where I can help? If they say no, think about making your own. If that sounds like a lot of work, think about just doing something on the side. If you have a hobby that you have no intention of turning into a business, just role play turning it into a business. What would it take to sell your painted Warhammer figurine? What would you need? And how do you get there? You don't have to do it, but you can set up a Gmail to test. You can join a free trial of Squarespace. Yeah, just figure out what it takes to fill in the blanks. And I think you will have a lot more fun than just trying to force yourself to learn something because some random guy says it's important.
I'm sure you scared a lot of people with that statement of, yeah, man, just get out there and do it and then figure it out. But that's 100% correct, man. Sometimes you just got to start walking to realize, okay, that's how we run and go from there. So no, that's great, man. And to the idea of reaching out to people, man, if people want to learn more from you, learn more about CosmoForge, whatever it be, how can they best reach out to you as well as the company?
Yeah, you can reach out to me at Dylan@cosmoforge.io. That's DILLON @cosmoforge.io. That's also the website domain if you want to check us out there. Happy to help anyone. Just reach out with your question.
Awesome, man. Again, today's been awesome. We've learned a ton. We really appreciate you coming on today and providing all this great information.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more, then make sure to check out episode 11, where we interviewed Nancy Trigg, a business coach and mentor. She dives deep into the key elements to growing and scaling your company for long-lasting and sustainable results. Make sure to follow us on all our socials, link down in the description, and tune in every other Monday for more episodes. Now that you've learned more, go earn more.